I'll now introduce our speaker, Chloe. Chloe Kirlew is a guided spirit and holistic health and consent educator doing her work as the ReiQueer. Believing fiercely in the faith and strength within QBIPOC communities, she stands to hold space for and witness the magical and radical self-healing power of herself and others. Welcome, Chloe.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that intro, Miranda, and thank you so much for having me. 108 people, no big deal. I'm a little nervous, but I'm super excited to speak with you all today. It's even more resonant with me because I used to go to Ryerson. I graduated not too long ago, so it's a really lovely full circle moment, and I appreciate the space. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Before I do, I invite everyone to get comfortable in the space, whatever way that looks like. So for taking notes, making sure that we're not clenching in any way. This is definitely an hour to indulge in education, but also what feels good in our bodies. So feel free to grab some water, something to keep up our sustenance. And I will go ahead and share. We will also be doing a bit of a journal prompt towards the end. So if you'd like to get something to write with or your journal, if you have one, then now's the time to grab that, but there'll be time for that later as well. Excellent. So I'm just going to turn on closed captioning. Okay, excellent. Hopefully the captions are coming up for everyone. I'll do my best to enunciate so that they are as accurate as possible. Another introduction again, my name is Chloe. I do my work as the ReiQueer, a holistic health consent educator, as well as a Reiki practitioner. It is super amazing to be invited into spaces specifically that are educational spaces because we are already predisposed to taking in information. And I think it's really awesome when we can start the practice of taking information in a new way and in a way that offers a different type of critical thinking. So as we're going through the workshop, if there are any access needs or if there are any questions, we'll make sure to go through the questions as a designated period, and I'll occasionally go through the chat. If you have an access need that you would like addressed in the moment, you can feel free to hit the raise your hand button, which should be at the bottom, so that I'll see that and it won't just get lost in the chat. Okay, and if we're all ready and comfortable, let's get started. So this is Decolonizing Our Creativity, a guide to learning, unlearning, and dreaming. We'll be talking a lot about things such as rest is resistance. And so again, I want to reiterate that this is a space to really indulge, again, not only in education, but what is resonant and what feels good in our bodies. So I'd like to first start off with a land acknowledgement. So we want to first start off by giving recognition and thanks for the land that we are currently on. So today I'm speaking to you from Toronto, also known as Turtle Island traditionally, which is the home of the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Métis, the Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit peoples, as well as many, many First Nations, Métis, Indigenous peoples seen and unseen, known and unknown. Toronto is governed by the District 1 Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee Allied Nations to peacefully share, care for the land, the Great Lakes, and its resources. So today we recognize the many Indigenous folk who still live on, still protect, and still defend this land. And we also recognize the massive violence, treaty violations, state genocide that is still currently happening within Indigenous populations on Indigenous land. So it's super important for us who are settlers on this land to continuously use our voice and opportunities, resources, and privilege to pay respect to and to help protect our Indigenous kin by means of decolonizing our language and being very critical of the things that we have learned, the untruth that we've learned about Canada, about this land, about Indigenous people seen and unseen who have always been here since the beginning of time. And of course, within the topic that we're talking about today of decolonizing our creativity, is extremely important that we first start off with our land acknowledgement, because we understand that colonization doesn't just exist in a vacuum, and it trickled down and nuanced and was able to grow and affect many different areas of life. Um, so our agenda today looks like speaking about the colonization trickle down. We'll explain something I've coined called the dream theory, as well as talking about how to reimagine our resistance. We'll take a bit of a break, and when we come back, we'll discuss the care continuum, we'll do a visualization activity, as well as a dream journal prompt, and then we'll do a bit of grounding and a checkout. So I'd like to start by first speaking about the colonization trickle down and what that even is. So it essentially is the effects of colonization that were not necessarily immediate, but rather were able to grow and nuance over time. So this looks like attitudes, behaviors, and practices that were bred and grown in response to a white supremacist society. So through this lens, our view of life can look competitive, profitable, and scarce. The colonization trickle down has affected major key areas in our life, such as work, play, and self. So, in the instance of work, through the again nuances of colonization and through the limitations and the oppressions that we have felt, we have really had our relationships to things like work, play, and self definitely damaged and informed by this white supremacist society. So, for example, in the case of work, we now view work as an intrinsic part of life. And for those that aren't working, we sometimes might have a misguided anger at what is an exploitative system, but might come out and manifest into a disdain or a lack of trust or a lack of respect for those that do not work. Through this lens, we believe that we must work in order to earn or deserve a good life. In the sense of play, our play has been impeded upon in the sense where our joy is now heavily censored. Our playtime is contingent upon our work time. Again, that piece of needing to earn things such as a good life or needing to earn things such as play and rest. On our priority list, play is usually ranked fairly low as it's not treated as a need. Through this lens, Stoicism is synonymous to adulthood, and we believe that seriousness is the only path to maturity, seeing those that are silly or not as serious as childish, immature, and not worthy of trust. In the sense of self, we are consistently going through self evaluations to determine our own value. Right after we were born, we were essentially asked immediately to prove our worth and to prove what exactly we can contribute and how we can assimilate into this society. And so this can look like a panic and a fear that builds inside of us when we're not doing anything, feeling lazy, when we're not doing anything, and having little interest or time to indulge in our interests in spiritual or mental health. Is this making sense so far? Sharon. Excellent. So the dream theory. So the dream theory is something that I coined because I figured that there had to be a way to explain the many areas that colonization has affected us. And so through this theory, we can see how neo-colonization has impaired our relationship to foundational aspects of the human experience, that being desire, rest, energy, abundance, and mindfulness. So, for desire, the politics of what is acceptable and attractive is largely informed by misogynistic and dehumanizing expectations. These desirability politics exist at large to appeal to a cisgendered, heterosexual, usually white, able bodied men. And through this lens, undesirable bodies look like darker bodies, fat bodies, disabled bodies, and elderly bodies. In the case of rest, we can see how pause and relaxation are now being turned into rewards, which means that they're only available to us once we've proven our worth through labor of some sort. Through this lens, indulgence in rest is seen as lazy, and our understanding of productivity is skewed and capitalistic. And I'd like to explain that because once we say that we have a productive day, what we usually mean is that we had a day where we were able to check a bunch of boxes and get things done and had a plan for the day and succeeded in completing our tasks. So I want to assure us that there's nothing wrong in that. It's totally okay to have mobilizing forces and to have labor and to reward yourself for that labor, because we do, to a degree, all um, involve ourselves in labor at some point. However, what has happened over time is that we have conflated productivity to mean the same thing as labor, meaning that if we lay down for the day, or we rest for the day, or we don't work for the day, we're usually not as apt to call that or label that a productive day. So I'd like us to create some space in between what we understand productivity to be and how productivity can also look like nourishing. It doesn't always have to look like expending labor. In the case of energy, we have, I wouldn't say we live necessarily in a society where, but I will say at large, I've noticed there is a lot of encouragement of a disregard and a disrespect of the intangible. So this means the things that we can't see, the things that we can't feel, the things that we can't actually touch. So the physical body is usually the only body layer that we acknowledge. And in this, spirituality is often conflated to religion rather than being understood as the desire to seek connection beyond our bodies and the very basic knowledge that we can exist beyond our bodies. I'd also like to take this time to acknowledge that a lot of the things that we'll touch on today are teachings and practices that are intrinsic to a lot of indigenous teachings and scriptures. And so engaging in conversations like this itself is an act of resistance. In the case of abundance, we are sometimes of the mindset that there is not enough resources to share. And so, because of that, we must all compete for them. Through this, we glorify greed and wealth hoarding, and we have little respect for mutual aid and redistribution of funds resources. Our mindfulness has certainly been impeded upon in the sense where our inner peace is consistently sacrificed to meet demands of others. So things such as dissociation, disconnect, and daydreams become more of a lived reality rather than moments. Self reflection is sometimes viewed as a waste of time, and interconnectedness is not valued. So the idea and the knowledge that although we are individuals, we are intrinsically interconnected and can therefore be of mutual aid to one another is not necessarily always acknowledged. So, resistance reimagined. I'm super excited to talk about this. So, for some of us, resistance as we know it may look like protesting, signing petitions, donating, really being on the front lines. And this type of resistance is called mobilizing. And it's an extremely important part. It's physical, it's intentional acts, it's what gets a lot done, it's what we can historically see to have been the catalyst to a lot of change and a lot of conversations. However, when we place resistance in a hierarchy with mobilizing as the most important, we begin to unknowingly feed back into that same mindset of valuing our actions solely on our labor. So, what I'm proposing here is a more holistic approach to resistance, whereby mobilizing is equal parts to other things. So, I have written here resistance is an anti colonization practice. It involves actively advocating for misjustice as well as the acknowledgement of our own privilege and harm. So, through this, it's more than protesting. It's also an internal holistic process that involves learning, unlearning, and reclamation that also centers care at its core. So, in our pie chart here, we have mobilizing as an equal and important part, and we also have rest, the process where we're able to be still. Through resting, there's a lot to uncover. Resting is where we're able to have self reflection. Resting is where we're able to feed our own inner wells. Resting is the space that allows us to recharge in order to mobilize. Listening is super important because through the listening process involves very necessary skills such as unlearning. And a part of unlearning is allowing other voices to explain themselves and to allow ourselves to be educated. And in listening, we're able to really connect to what's going on around us and how we can be of service. Visualization is something that's not really spoken about very often, but is kind of at the core of literally everything. So if you look around this room right now, every single product, every single thing that you see was at once a visualization. It started off as a thought, then it was a sketch, then it was a prototype, then it was a product. So in this, we can see how visualization is really the starting mark for everything. It's that intangible space where we're able to plan and strategize and build. With strategizing, I like to say that strategizing combines visualization and mobilizing, because it's that process of, again, existing in that intangible space where we're able to draw from what we've seen, we're able to draw from the things that are physically happening and use things like visualization, rely on things like rest and listening to actually strategize in what is the most helpful outcome in their situation. And again, how we can be of service in a way that makes sense for us. Okay, so that was, a lot of information. I'd love to give you all a break. It's 1:23 right now, so we'll see each other back in the Zoom room for 1:33 for the second half of our time together. Hello, everyone. It is 1:33. Hopefully, we are back from our break time, and I hope that we had time to move our bodies a little bit, maybe drink some water, look somewhere other than a screen. Just checking that we are all back and ready to continue. If you don't mind throwing me a thumbs up emoji on your window. Awesome. Excellent. Welcome back. Welcome back. So before we continue, I just want to leave a bit of space if anyone had any questions on anything that we went over in the first half. We will have another designated question portion, but I want to be mindful of the fact that there's a lot of information here and we might accidentally skip over a question otherwise. I did see one earlier on, so I'll go back and answer that. And then if there's no more, we'll just continue. So somebody asked, how might the division between work and play change within and around digital spaces? I think that's an awesome question. So right now, workspaces are a lot because our workspace is usually also our home space, which is usually our sleeping space, which is our playing space, which is our eating space. It's kind of all in the same, there is very little separation now, whereas before we might have left the home to go to work or to go to school. Now we're kind of still here. And so within that process, there is a lot of unhelpful adapting that might happen. For example, an increase in screen time, whereas before, again, you might have had that time to go home and go on the subway or commute back home and to have time to reflect, to have time to think. They're very condensed blocks of time that are now stacked on top of each other. So I would say one way to address that division between work and play is to increase the space in between the two. So be mindful of what you're doing in between tasks and getting into the habit of really checking in with ourselves, not necessarily asking, okay, what exactly do I have to get done today? But we can start by asking how we're feeling today, what our capacity is, what time we want to finish working, etc. So in that way, we can start to create a bit more ease within our workspaces, which can also make leaning into play feel a little bit better. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay, so the next part of our talk is the care continuum, a conversation that I'm really excited to have as well. So right here, we have this gorgeous little diagram of self-care as community care, essentially, which is kind of the bulk of what I'm talking about here. So Indigenous teachings demonstrate a way of being that acknowledges the health of the community as connected to the health of the individual. So decolonizing our care practices looks like dissolving that separation between self-care and community care, which basically looks like acknowledging and listening to our needs of ourselves as an individual, and also taking into account how ourselves as an individual relates to our communities as a whole. So this can look like listening to the needs of others and unpacking our own harm allows us to show up for our communities from a place of authenticity rather than a place of shame and guilt. And of course, when we're coming from a place of authenticity, we're able to really ask questions that are helpful and we're able to really position ourselves to be supportive rather than coming from a place of shame or guilt where we might have that drive to want to help, but our intentions aren't that necessarily helpful and are centering ourselves in that way. Somebody in the chat says, and I would note that Indigenous teachings that exemplify this include Indigenous African teachings, as well as here in Turtle Island. Thank you so much for saying that, River. That is so true and so important, that this does not only apply to us who are in North America, that there are Indigenous people, including Indigenous African teachings all over, all that have the core of community care as integral, and just again putting care to the forefront and putting community to the forefront, which is something that was lost very intentionally in the colonization and in white supremacy and the teachings and the very intentional breaking of communities, or the attempt to break communities. Okay, so we're gonna do a visualization activity, which I'm really, really, really excited about. I love doing this because this visualization activity is something that challenges us to use other parts of our brain. So we might be used to writing and studying and researching and really being able to delve into material. And so I want us to kind of inverse that and have that same drive, but extending that to our imagination so that we're also giving as much attention and drive into our thought process the same way that we would at Daydream. And so the way, if you've never done a visualization exercise before, I have it written down, then I really encourage you to lean into the process. And this can just look like relaxing, you know? I'll explain how it works. So, what we'll first start by doing is building an awareness of ourselves and as our body. And then we'll drop that awareness into our body and then use our imagination to expand it outwards. And then we'll see what happens. So before we start, I invite you to get comfortable in whatever way makes sense right now. We won't have to be doing a lot of looking or reading, or any looking or reading right now. So if you'd like to, you're welcome to close your eyes and lay down, or do whatever makes you feel comfortable in your space. I will be playing some sounds like this. So if this is a sensory or an accessibility problem for anyone, please raise your hand or send me a private message. The sounds will sound like this. And before we start, I again want to invite everyone to really welcome movement. For those of us that sit, I'm so guilty of this too. There's a lot of shoulder hunching, of jaw clenching. So we're really going to allow our bodies to be as loose as they need to be right now. They might start to tell you if there's an ache in the shoulder or in the lower back. So feel free to move around and to breathe. And we're going to begin our visualization by practicing a type of breathing called belly breathing. So, for those that aren't familiar, I'll explain how it works. So, when we breathe through our bellies, we inhale and we fill at the same time. So, our inhale looks like gathering all the air that we can through our nose or through our mouth, extending our tummy so that it's nice and round, holding that breath for 1 or 2 heartbeats, and then releasing nice and slowly, either out through the nose or through the mouth. So when we belly or body breathe, our goal is to have our inhale match the length of our exhale. On a scientific level, this helps trigger our parasympathetic nervous system, which essentially lets our bodies and brains know that we are safe and we're okay to relax. And it's a similar quality of breathing that we find when we're in REM sleep. So from the inside out, we're really inviting safety and letting our bodies know that it's okay to relax for these next few moments. So we can practice that breathing together. On the inhale, really gathering as much as we can, allowing ourselves to be filled, allowing our tummies to be round, holding that breath, and exhaling all the air in our bodies nice and slowly, like the air being pressed out of a tire. We're going to do that again, inhaling nice and full, rounding out our tummies, allowing ourselves to be full, holding for 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, and exhaling. And then I'll let you take another breath at your own pace. So on our third breath, while we're breathing here, we're going to start using our imagination and using our ability to feel our bodies without touching our bodies by inviting a warmth that blooms starting at the center of our chest and our heart space. If you like, you could put both hands. If you like, you can have your hands flat away from your body, whatever feels good for you. And as we breathe, we're going to imagine that with each inhale, that warmth is growing and spreading in intensity, but also in volume. And with our breath, as we're painting ourselves with this warmth, we can envision or imagine that this warmth actually has a color to it. And take a moment now to imagine what you want that to be. So perhaps it's gold, perhaps it's purple, perhaps it's rainbow colored, sparkly, whatever that looks like. As you're breathing here, really envision yourself being covered from that bloom that started in our chest all the way outwards until we are encased in this color. While we're here, we're going to flip our palms over so that they're facing upwards. Still feeling and noticing how our bodies feel now that we're placing awareness without necessarily moving or touching. Noticing the color that you've coated yourself in and how it makes you feel. And with our hands turned upwards, I want us to envision that this color begins to pool out in front of us until it starts to create a portal right in front of where we're sitting or laying. And through our mind's eye, using our imagination, I want you to look at this portal and really take in what it looks like. If it looks like the cartoon ones with all the swirls in it, if it looks different. More importantly, do you trust it? Would you go inside of it? How does it make you feel? If you're feeling iffy, if trusting this portal doesn't seem like a smart idea, I want you to take this time to set an intention that if you were to step in this portal, that it would take you somewhere safe. You can also ask it where to take you. So you can ask it to take you somewhere beautiful. You can ask it to take you somewhere that you miss and you haven't been in a really long time. You can ask it to take you to outer space. You can ask it to take you to the bottom of the ocean, wherever you want to go. And so now on our next breath, I want us to imagine ourselves stepping and falling into this portal, allowing our imagination to conjure what it would look like to fall through this time and space, really falling through it, emerging on the other side to where? So when you do follow the other side of this portal, I want you to ask yourself, where am I? It's not the same as the room that you started in. Allowing our imaginations again to really exist, to really fuel our dreams and our thoughts right now. Do you recognize your surroundings? Take this time here to walk around or float or swim or whatever applies, and really familiarize yourself with the mental landscape that you've created in your dream world. And if you don't like where you are, you can simply get back into the portal and ask it to take you somewhere else. So let's spend some time here just walking around or existing in whatever space we found ourselves in now. So as you're in this space, you suddenly notice that there is some movement coming from the portal. Someone is trying to join you. The person emerges and you finally see who they are, and you're instantly covered with relief and comfort to see them. Who is it? Who has joined you? Look at their face and greet them. In this space that you've created, you and your loved one now have time to frolic about in your dream world. What do you do? Where do you go? What type of things do you see? We can spend some time here just existing. Remember, if you're ever starting to feel uncomfortable, you can return back to that breath that we practiced of belly breathing and anchoring our awareness back into our bodies. While you're spending time here with your loved one, you both understand that it is now time to go, time to leave the dream for the moment. And you walk back into the portal together, falling through space and time and our imaginary tubes and tunnels till we're back in the room that we started in. Feel free, if it resonates, to introduce more movement in your fingers and your toes if you haven't moved them in a while, or in your shoulders and your neck. Breathing, settling, noticing that there might be a difference in atmosphere or our own personal atmosphere from our activity of leaving our physical bodies for a moment, or at least extending beyond them and existing in a space that we've created. And so I like to share this visualization exercise because we can use the basis of this exercise to help us with a lot. This is a space where we're able to create whatever we want to and whatever we need to, and we're able to bring in and call in whoever we need to. So I invite you, whenever it resonates, to have a similar practice if you're ever feeling overwhelmed or needing to call in more space or call in more care for yourself. So give us a couple more minutes just to re-arrive back into the room. And when you're ready to go, you can let me know in the chat or by putting up an emoji in your Zoom window. I'll pause for one more minute, give folks some time. Thank you for everyone that is throwing up your emojis. We can also use this time to debrief a little bit on how that exercise was, how that felt in our bodies and our minds, and what that was like. So you can feel free to share your experience in the chat if you'd like while we're waiting for everyone to resettle. Lovely. I love seeing our responses in the chat. Welcome back. So while we're in this dreamy space, I'd like us to consider some prompts. So these are prompts that we can kind of just read and ingest and sit with and really evaluate in our own bodies how it feels and what our experiences have been like. So in regards to our relationship to creativity, I have 4 thinking questions here that I'd like us to ponder. So our first one is, am I being kind? So bringing awareness to the ways that you speak to yourself while you're creating, asking, is your inner voice supportive and nurturing? And if it's not, asking, what is it then if not that? Is it demanding? Is it shrill? And really leaning into the fact that if our inner voice or our voices to ourselves while we're creating sounds familiar in negative ways, that the things that we have internalized or heard about ourselves are not always what's actually happening and usually pretty far removed from who we are as people. So, really inviting nourishing and nurturing within our inner voice and within our inner processes while we're creating anything. Where are my values? So, asking ourselves, what is the goal behind my creation? If it's for profit, then how can I incorporate rest and breaks and relaxation? And if it's for fun, then does it feel fun? Asking ourselves, am I reducing my art or my work to a product? The third question is, what inspires me? Am I creating because I feel inspired to create or because I feel panic or anxiety about not creating? Do I feel gratitude for the things that excite me? Lastly, what do I do afterwards? So, reminding ourselves that our identity is not based on and defined by the things that we can do or the things that we can create, things that we can write or think about. We are multidimensional beings with many, many layers and many experiences. So, asking ourselves, how do I honor all of who I am outside of my abilities? So, I really love that we're able to have this slide deck available for folks afterwards because these are questions that, even in my own practice, is very necessary to return to and reflect on and think about. Okay, now let's take a breath. We've done a lot of learning, we've done some traveling. This is our moment now to ask any questions. We have a few more moments together before our time is done. So if you do have any, please feel free to put them in the chat now. I'll take a look. Trying to, there we go. So this isn't a question, but it's a comment that I think is really lovely. So someone says, I used to practice this, and I'm assuming it's like the meditation, not meditation, the visualization exercise. I used to practice this when I did yoga and I meditated frequently. For a while, I haven't been able to connect on that level. So thank you for this. It reminds me how much I need to ground myself and just stop, breathe, and truly exist for a moment. Amazing. And I think that you touched on something that's so important, the ability to celebrate ourselves for just existing. It's necessary, especially right now. Someone says in the chat, this year has forced us to not have any plans slash cancel our plans slash limit our options. And it has been a whirlwind of just having to exist without looking forward. So for me, it's been a reminder of being present. Amazing. Thank you for that. And I'd also like to say that right now, our relationship to being present, rightfully so, has kind of been affected because it can be a little hard right now to be present. Sometimes being present is a little crushing. And so allowing a forgiving definition at times of what it means to be present. If that day everything is overwhelming or things feel too much, maybe being present is just being connected to what you need, being connected to eating and resting and moving around. Um, and of course, being there for that spectrum of that. Someone says, could you speak more on the care continuum, particularly the process of helping your community while remaining authentic? Thank you for that question. Absolutely. So, within the care continuum, what we're essentially talking about is the practice of putting our self care at the forefront in our own bodies and in our own minds, so that when we are able to show up for our communities, we can do so from a place of authenticity because we've done the work. So, if we are, for example, showing up for our communities, but we haven't really spent the time to sit with ourselves and to address our own internalized harm, for example, to address the ways that we feel inadequate, to address the ways that we have internalized our colonization practices, then the work that we're doing from that standpoint within that community might be a little bit challenging for those involved. on the other side, if we're able to understand that to be in community is to first connect with ourselves, to connect with our needs, to be honest, to take accountability, and to be transparent. From that lens, we're able to show up for our communities in a way that looks like mobilizing with authenticity, which looks like keeping community care at the core of our intention. Hopefully that makes sense. Someone says, when you discussed how we are feeling about creating and if we are creating because we are inspired and want to, or if we are creating because we're panicked and anxious, um, and because the creating isn't happening or doesn't flow, really resonated with me. It's such a reminder to myself to be kind and to remember that creativity isn't a straight path and that's okay. Absolutely. Someone says, could you speak a little more to the importance of afterwards in relation to our creativity? Yes, absolutely. So in previous workshops, I've talked about a process that I like to call the immersion and extraction process, which essentially means that while we are involved in any type of work, that we allow ourselves to be immersed in that. So to extend what we're able to and to really show up for the work with our hearts and with our resources and with the things that we're able to give. However, the extraction process, which is the accompanying piece, is to also separate, to have separation from the things that we do, the things that we care about, to the how we actually feel in our bodies. Because how we feel in our bodies at times will definitely inform the things that we care about and the things that we do. And so our afterwards looks like aftercare. It looks like saying, okay, I just expended a lot of energy, or I just spent a lot of time in service. How can I refill that well? Or how can I bring myself to a um, level where I feel settled? You know, how can I limit some of the traffic that's going on from my big buzzing brain and kind of just exist in the moment? And so it can certainly involve a bit of trial and error, depending on what you need as an individual and the types of ways that you like to relax. Hopefully that makes sense. Someone asked about if you have any advice for explaining these concepts to someone more skeptical or who was more influenced by a colonized mindset. Yes, so that is a little bit tricky because you can certainly share information and resources with anyone, but it certainly will also depend on the reception of the person and whether or not they have already kind of closed their minds. So there's a difference between someone who is not really educated on it or and might still have those internalized colonization beliefs, but has still a curiosity on what it is and how they can possibly do better and learn other things. And there's a difference between someone who again has those internalized colonization practices and is rather combative and is looking for ways to kind of rebut. And so I say, especially for those existing in queer bodies and racialized bodies, to do an assessment to see if this is something that is going to be an okay thing for you to engage in, understanding that although education is something that we bring to our communities in service, that is not something that we are obligated to do in every instance. And so I would say, just starting off by asking questions is a great way. Things like, do you know that colonization was kind of more than just the physical act of colonization and how that has kind of trickled down? Starting to have these conversations and how the little things, the neo-colonization is a great way to start with that. So neo-colonization is essentially the colonization of today. It's how colonization has nuanced and kind of become modern and normalized and colloquial. And so having conversations like that, I think, is a great starting point for those that are willing to learn. Okay, I hope that was helpful for everyone. And thank you, Pauline, for putting my website in the chat. I saw that someone was asking about connecting afterwards, so you certainly can do so through the ReiQueer.com, and there'll be another slide as well. Someone says, do you have any advice for finding the balance between being easy on yourself and having self-discipline? I always find it hard to be easy on myself or give myself off days because I fear that I'm running out of time and I'm not putting enough pressure on myself. If that makes sense. That makes a ton of sense. So a couple of things to, I think, address here. So being easy on ourselves and having self-discipline, I think we should first define what it means to be easy on ourselves. Because if being easy on ourselves means being gentle, means not rushing, then I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. But if being easy on ourselves looks like slipping on our responsibilities, not being reliable, disappointing ourselves, then there are certainly practices that we can employ to help with that. And so, in your case, when you're saying that you have difficulties giving yourself off days because you fear that you're running out of time and you're not putting enough pressure on yourself, I want you to realize that that mindset that there's not enough time, I have to do all the things, and I need to put pressure on myself to make this happen is still a byproduct of that colonization capitalistic mindset, whereby we have to be in consistent mobilization. And if we have days or several days when we're not, this fear starts to creep up that there's no more time left and that we're not going to do it all. And so I want us to recognize during these times when we're having these thoughts that they're certainly valid because they're coming from a very real place of being put in a society where we're told we have to consistently prove our wealth. But I think continue to be easy on yourself if that looks like allowing space for that. And understanding that our mindsets and our actions don't change overnight. This is a practice for a reason. It's ways that we can start to integrate ways to relax and to sit and to breathe and to also connect with the parts that feel good. Especially as students, we're very much used to shelving our needs to bang out the paper or to get our research done. You know, we sit in the same spot, cramping, needing to pee, dehydrated AF, you know, so allowing things like that to slowly start to undo because we're people and, you know, we deserve to be watered and be in the sun and feel good. And it's the accompanying piece to the work that we do. Okay, I think I have time for a couple more and then we'll move on. We do have one more small activity. Okay, so while I'm answering a couple more questions in the chat, I'd like us to take the next, is it okay if we take 5 more minutes, Miranda? If we take the next 5 minutes just to sort out our journal prompt. And so I have our journal prompt in two pieces here, our consideration and then what we're actually gonna write. So the pause before the writing, which can be helpful. So I want us to consider three things. What is your current relationship to rest? How do you feel in your body and your mind when you are not working? And what is your experience with pause, slow pace, and stillness? On consideration of that, our journal prompt is in three parts as well. So the first is, what gifts of rest and restoration can I give to myself? Number two, how can I hold myself accountable to taking breaks? And number three, consider a dream or a goal of yours. What is the intention behind it? How does it nourish you and your community? Excuse me. So feel free to take the next 5 minutes to consider and to write down our prompts, keeping in mind the things that we've talked about and begun to unpack about our own internalized colonization or our own internalized capitalistic mindset. And in the meantime, I'll try to answer some more questions in the chat. Okay, so somebody says, do you have any recommendations for readings regarding rest and anti-capitalism or unlearning colonialism? So a lot of my education and knowledge from this type of discourse has come a lot from word of mouth teachings, from community elders, but also from people in similar positions doing very specific decolonizing work in groups. I haven't seen a lot of academia on it, but to be honest, I haven't been looking. I needed a break. But I will say that in terms of resources, the NAP ministry, if anyone's familiar, does a lot of amazing work on specifically leading into rest as resistance. They have a social media media, I believe an Instagram page, and they also have more resources for you to read up on how to invite that into your life. So I deeply recommend checking them out. So let's allow maybe 2 more minutes. You don't have to hurry and finish your journal if it's not done, but I do want to be cognizant of our time. And then we will wrap for the evening or for the afternoon. If anyone has finished their journal prompts early and you'd like to share, please feel free to put them in the chat. I love to see how supportive everyone is of one another. I've been reading some of the little conversations that have been happening. This is really great discourse. So someone made a super interesting comment and they said, I feel like if the calendar didn't exist, it would be so much easier to take free time. So be easy on yourself. LOL. Measuring time is so stressful. Yeah, it absolutely is. And we're kind of the only species that do. The way that other animals measure time is in accordance to their body. So to know, like, where to move, where to go, where to find food, things like that. So it's all very instinctive. And so to get back to that space is super great. Sure. So someone wants a super quick review on the dream theory, which I can very, 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 very briefly. So the dream theory is essentially how neocolonization has impaired our relationship to foundational aspects of the human experience. These foundational aspects include desire, rest, energy, abundance, and mindfulness. So when the slide deck is sent over to you, I would definitely implore if you're able to read a little bit more about how each of these things have had their affected by the trickle down of colonization on what is considered desirable, on what is acceptable rest, disbelief and a disrespect on energy and spirituality and things that are outside of the physical visible body, our view of abundance as the world is scarce. So things like that. Hopefully that was it was a very super brief overview, but I hope that was able to contextualize it a little more. So I'd like to end off with a really nice quote that I really love. It says, find freedom in the context you inherit. I really enjoyed this quote very much because it highlights a very important word, which is context. So in this quote, it challenges us to, first of all, be aware of the context, the socioeconomic, the sociopolitical context that we're currently existing in. And then it involves finding freedom, which involves asking us if freedom is even possible. So I think within this quote, it's something for us all to reflect on the ways that we regard freedom and the ways in which freedom, given our current oppression, is possible through resistance and is impeded upon. Okay, and that was our time together. So my name is Chloe. Again, I also do my work as the ReiQueer, a community health consent educator, also a Reiki practitioner, also an artist. I do have my Instagram handle as well as my website if anyone else would like to keep in touch. So just like to say thank you again so much for Miranda for inviting me, for Pauline who referred me in the first place. And this has been a super nourishing block of time. And yeah, I hope that we're all able to take something away.